in the form of grant, no loan, but because of the ethical dimension that as suffering countries, they are not they should not be subjected to loan. But on the other hand, as I highlighted by one of the presenters, it's not that easy to define, or the types of adaptation programs. It can be regular programs which is supported, financed by loan as well as grant. So this is interlinked issues actually. But again, coming back to my first question is whether we can add one point to your outstanding questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Please, in the back.
My name is Ehsan Mahbud Qazi. I am assistant professor in Agriculture University Peshawar, Food Science and Technology, and doing my PhD with Professor Sudeep Kumar Rakshit, Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. I have two questions and very short questions. And from all of you, you talk about the quality, both the quality and quantity of financing or money. But I will specify one thing, maybe it covers under the quality of financing, but terms of financing for climate change. On what terms that's our funding? And like I will give you example, like in Asia especially, these works on climate change, it starts in maybe in 80s, but very specifically in late 80s and early 90s, that there are some funds from those countries which have threat from the sinking down in the sea. So they have bring some projects, and they fix the terms. Okay, you have to plant the trees, for example, eucalyptus rather than the pine trees, and which in turns have an effect on the, because it sucks a lot of water from the ground, then it have effect on the cultivated lands, and which in turn again bring climate change, and then in turn, over turn they have again caused the problem for those countries. That's one question. Second part is that, okay, I don't want to discuss the political side of the problem, but yet it has some issue or problem, causing problem to the climate change, and that is after 9/11, like the tribal areas in Pakistan, because I'm from Pakistan, and district Dir, which is very get a lot of problem from these issues. But still, yes, it creates some problem due to the climate change. So on what terms and in conditions the financing should be done, and then like to solve these climatic change problem? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Not that short question. I think what you were referring is maybe how to avoid that finance promotes maladaptation. I think that was maybe the reference. I see 3 hands. I just would like to take the here and the gentleman, then come back to the panel, and then to the back, okay? I'm taking note of that. Thank you.
I'm Nick Kais. I'm with the Academy for Educational Development, and I have a question for Lena regarding CSR. I work for a climate mitigation program where the level of engagement and interest with the private sector is very high. And it's high because the private sector sees this now not just as a CSR issue, but also as an opportunity. Obviously, this is highest in clean energy, energy efficiency. With adaptation, though, it's not quite as clear where the opportunities lie. Obviously, there's climate proofing of corporations' infrastructure, there's CSR, sort of traditional CSR funding. Where do you see areas, or do you see areas of investment for the private sector in climate change adaptation? Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me just give back to the panel just to answer, and then we go on. Okay, I took note of the colleagues in the back. Okay, you will be the next. If you can just come back to the panel. Okay, so we have a bit of a discussion here. Salim, I think you had like 2 questions addressed to you about the double accounting and which form of the climate finance. Maybe you can take both of them.
I'll take them both together, but let me just frame the discussion a little bit first. I sense a lot of people here are very much involved in development, whether they're as donors or practitioners or planners at the national level. If you think of this thing as a climatic problem that we've just discovered through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientists are telling us that the climate is changing, we need to take it into account. We need to then do that. Then it's part of a new dimension of development activities at national level, all the practitioners, and development funding for those who fund development. And it's incorporating a new risk, if you like. That's a practical dimension of this, and we should do it. We don't have to decide exactly how much is climate change and how much isn't. It doesn't really matter. We define the risk involved, we take action to mitigate that risk, and that should be done. And from a development funding perspective for the donors involved, I'm a UK citizen, and as a UK taxpayer, I want my DFID, my Department for International Development, to be cognizant of any risk and to incorporate the mitigation of that risk as a sound fiduciary duty for the investments that they're making. All right? That should be just normal practice. They don't have to say how much is adaptation, how much isn't. Now, the question of adaptation arises in a completely different context. Why do we use the term? The context is man-made changes in the atmosphere. And we have a treaty to deal with it called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Not the UN Framework Convention on Development, on climate change, on pollution. It is a pollution-caused problem which will have impacts on certain parts of the world. And there are some groups of countries that have primary responsibility, and they're listed in the UNFCCC in Annex 1. We call them Annex 1 countries. And there are other countries that are going to be the victims of that pollution. And there's an obligation under the treaty for the perpetrators of the pollution to provide funding to the victims of pollution. It's a political question about this man-made question of climate change. And any funding that is allocated there is not development assistance. It may be utilized in conjunction with development assistance, but it's not development assistance. It's polluters paying the victims of pollution. And that is the paradigm under which it's done. And under that paradigm, you have to keep this clear. We now have a community of people that are bridging development and climate change. And if you're coming from the development side, you have to understand the climate change side. It's not just simply saying we do what is practical on the ground. In the Climate Change Convention, it matters why they're giving the money. And so the difference is, when you're giving development assistance, you can choose which countries you want to give it to. When you're giving climate change funding, you don't get to choose. You put it in the pot, the UNFCCC decides which countries get it. The receivers have a say. When it's development assistance, the receivers don't have much of a say. The givers have all the say. There's a big difference in the paradigm under which this is operating. So to answer the question about grants or loans, loans are not eligible. Absolutely not eligible. They're not acceptable to the developing countries. Only grants are acceptable. The fact that a giving country may say that they've given a loan and met their obligation doesn't allow them to get away with it. The obligation is something that has to be agreed in the UNFCCC. That's why I'm saying in Cancun it matters. In Cancun, unless developing countries agree to what the developed countries say they're doing, it doesn't count. Just them saying we've done it doesn't count. And they have to get the agreement of the recipients. And that's something that a lot of them don't understand. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. These are a lot of underlying issues, but I think that was important to frame the discussion when we come to these very particular sets. I would like to pass the floor to, yeah, please, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add one more comment to that about development assistance and adaptation financing. Every country usually has a dialogue with IMF, and there's a cap on the amount of development assistance they're going to receive, what is their borrowing capacity, and loans, even if they're climate change adaptation loans, fall under those discussions. And so those are not additional resources. Those are part of ODA, and they're considered as part of the overall assistance to that country. So I think it's just adding on to the point that was just made, climate change adaptation financing should be grant, and it should be additional to ODA.
Thank you so much. Tommy, would you like to address the issue of quality, quantity, maladaptation? Maybe?
Sure. Thanks very much to our colleague from Pakistan for that question. And clearly the terms around which finance are delivered are very much a quality issue. And you touched upon, the primary principle of aid effectiveness around the question of ownership of finance, external sources of finance. But you also prompted me, if you'll allow me, reminded me, I was in Pakistan 3 weeks ago, and this question about additionality was very much in the minds of at least some members of Pakistan at that time, because of course of the flood disaster. The issue of additionality is not only confined to the debate about climate change finance, but also disaster response. And there had been the UN's largest ever appeal for a disaster, $2 billion of additional finance beyond development finance was called for as an emergency response. And I visited a district level office, and they were being asked to track the separate funds for disaster response alongside resources for development. Now, at the district level, that's an extraordinary burden to place on officials who are dealing with day-to-day development issues, which include disaster response. So I think some of these issues at the global level and the calls for additionality are extremely important, but we must consider how aid and external resources are delivered right down to the local level. And a quick plug, there is a session tomorrow at 14:30 to 15:30 on local governance and climate change, which will get us right down to that delivery end, which I think is very important.
Thank you, Thomas. Are you on that panel as well? You are moderating.
No, a colleague of mine
okay.
is. So.
Anyway, I think it's very good actually make these interlinkages within this very important and big meeting. So thanks for that. There was a question to Olivier from the colleague in Indonesia, if you would like to address briefly, and then I give the floor to Lina.
Very briefly, because I cannot enter in the details of the framework of this climate change program law. And in fact, there is this high-level day-to-day dialogue between donors and local institutions, mostly government, but also others are involved, through technical committees and steering committee to follow up the assessment of this policy matrix. In parallel, and I think that it's also very important to mention it, there is some additional grant funds to pilot projects dedicated to demonstrate maybe some other way of channelizing the fund through the national budget towards some specific activities that are relevant regarding these climate change issues. And both of them are going together, this high-level policy dialogue and at the same time some very grassroots level financing dedicated to pilot activities. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also encourage that, in the follow-up, in the breaks, you can have a follow-up discussion on particular issues, but that was a good example. Thank you so much. Please, if you would like to respond on the private sector related.
Yeah, thanks for your question, which I think comes very much down to the question of the business case for engaging in adaptation. And since you ask about opportunities beyond CSR, maybe I should take a step back here and clarify what we mean when we talk about CSR. I think it is a mistake to consider CSR as equivalent to corporate philanthropy and donations. What we are talking about when we talk about CSR is very much actually strategic business investments in sustainable development. I think that's important to keep in mind as context. So in that context, what are the incentives for business to get involved? Where are the opportunities? I think one links very much to a more general case for CSR and for sustainable business practices, where businesses have understood the value that this brings to their brand, to trust, to reputation, as well as, of course, also an ethical decision as that being the right way to do business and to engage with stakeholders. And importantly, of course, this focus on stakeholders in CSR, business responsibilities to groups of stakeholders beyond what traditionally, I guess, was a responsibility to a single group of shareholders. The incentives for business to engage, as you also mentioned, is very clear, of course, when we're talking about business continuity. But I think business clearly understands what that also, again, means for the communities within which businesses operate, for the supply chains of global businesses. And there you very quickly actually reach down very much to the the ground level and to poor communities, if you're looking at small and medium-sized enterprises in global supply chains and business incentives to actually work together with some of those small suppliers and the communities within which they operate to ensure also business continuity through those supply chains. There is also an incentive with regards to new markets. Changing environments are always also an opportunity for business to do one of the things that it does best, namely innovate